In a single desperate moment, a kitchen maid did the unthinkable. She forced a kiss upon a king in front of his entire court. The great hall exploded into chaos. Nobles gasped in horror. Guards drew their swords, and the king, humiliated before 300 witnesses, ordered her thrown into the darkest dungeon to await execution at dawn. She had assaulted royalty. She had crossed a line no servant could ever return from. Her death was certain. But what no one understood, what the king himself couldn't possibly know, was that this wasn't an act of madness or desire. It was an act of salvation. Because in that forbidden kiss, the maid tasted something the king had not yet detected on his own lips, the unmistakable burn of deadly poison. Someone had just tried to murder the king, and she was the only witness. Now, locked in chains and condemned to die, she holds a secret that could either save a kingdom or condemn her to a traitor's grave. And when the king finally comes to her cell, demanding answers, when she speaks the name of the person who tried to kill him, the truth she reveals will shatter everything he believes about loyalty, love, and the woman who shares his throne. Because the would-be murderer isn't a shadowy assassin or a foreign enemy. It's someone far closer than he ever imagined. Someone who won't stop until every witness is silenced forever. The wine glass shattered against the stone floor, and in that frozen moment, before the screaming began, Miriam tasted death on her own lips, bitter, metallic, unmistakable. Her mouth still burned from the kiss she had forced upon King Edmund in front of 300 nobles, a kiss that had stolen the poisoned wine from his tongue and transferred it to hers. Now, as guards seized her arms with enough force to bruise bone, she wondered if saving a king's life would be the thing that ended her own. The great hall erupted into chaos. Women shrieked, men shouted, and through it all, King Edmund stood motionless at the head of the banquet table, his face pale as winter frost, his lips still wet from where her mouth had pressed against his. Miriam could see the exact moment his shock transformed into rage, the way his jaw clenched, how his fingers curled into fists against the carved oak table. She had humiliated him. In front of every noble house in the kingdom, a servant girl had kissed their sovereign as if she had the right to touch royalty. "Take her to the dungeons." The king's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Cold. Absolute. "I want her in chains before the moon rises." Miriam's knees buckled, but the guards held her upright, their metal gauntlets digging into her thin arms. She tried to speak, to explain, but her tongue felt thick and clumsy. The belladonna, her grandfather had taught her to recognize it by taste when she was just 7 years old, making her sample tiny amounts until her body learned to identify poison the way other girls learned to identify herbs for cooking. "Every poison has a signature," he used to say, his weathered hands steady as he prepared his tinctures. "Your tongue can save lives, Miriam. Remember that." She had remembered. But no one would listen to a kitchen maid who claimed she could taste death. The nobles parted as the guards dragged her toward the massive iron doors. Lady Catherine of Blackmore pressed a perfumed handkerchief to her nose, as if Miriam carried plague. Lord Richard of Ashford laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "The wench has gone mad," he announced to anyone who would listen. "Probably been sampling too much of the wine herself." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Miriam's face burned with shame, but beneath the humiliation, fear coiled in her stomach like a living thing. Someone had tried to kill the king tonight. Someone in this very room had placed belladonna in his wine, and now that person watched her being dragged away, safe in their anonymity, while she took the punishment for their crime. The corridor outside the great hall was dark and cold. Torchlight flickered against stone walls that wept with dampness, casting shadows that twisted and stretched like demons. Miriam's worn leather shoes scraped against the floor as the guards pulled her forward. Her mind raced, replaying the moment she had seen the wine being poured. She had been refilling bread baskets at the servants' station when she noticed the queen herself, Queen Isolde, beautiful and, untouchable, lean forward to whisper something to the cupbearer. Nothing unusual in that. But then the queen's hand had moved, just slightly, over the king's goblet. A gesture so quick, so subtle that Miriam almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Almost. But she knew the queen's face too well. She had studied it during the 3 months she had worked in the castle, memorizing the way Queen Isolde's expression never quite matched her words, the way her smiles never reached her eyes when she looked at her husband, the way she touched Lord Ashford's shoulder during banquets, her fingers lingering just a heartbeat too long. Miriam had grown up watching people, learning to read the truth beneath their masks. It was a skill born from necessity. When you are invisible, you see everything. The dungeon entrance loomed ahead, a gaping mouth of darkness that smelled of rot and despair. Miriam's heart hammered against her ribs. Her grandfather's face flashed through her mind. The way he had looked at her the day he died, his eyes clouded with fever, his final words barely a whisper. "You carry my knowledge now. Use it wisely." She had been 12 years old, newly orphaned, with nothing but his leather journal of remedies and poisons hidden beneath her threadbare mattress. That journal had been her only inheritance, her only education, her only chance at survival. "Down the steps," one of the guards grunted, shoving her toward a spiral staircase that descended into absolute blackness. The air grew colder with each step, thick with moisture and something else, the scent of human suffering, of bodies left to rot in forgotten cells. Miriam's throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe through her mouth, but that only made it worse, because now she could taste the dungeon on her tongue, metallic and foul. They reached the bottom, and a jailer emerged from the shadows, his face marked with old scars, his eyes empty of compassion. He held up a set of iron manacles, the metal stained dark with rust, or perhaps blood. Miriam's stomach lurched. "Please," she finally managed to speak, her voice cracking. "Please, I need to speak to the king. I saved him. The wine was poisoned. I tasted the belladonna." The back of a guard's hand connected with her cheek, snapping her head to the side. Pain exploded across her face, sharp and blinding. Her eyes watered, but she refused to cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. "Silence," the guard hissed. "You'll speak when the king commands it, and not before." They locked her in a cell barely large enough for a grown person to lie down. The manacles closed around her wrists with a click that sounded like finality. Through the small barred window in the iron door, she could see torchlight dancing in the corridor beyond, but inside her cell, darkness pressed against her like a physical weight. She sank to the floor, her back against the slimy stone wall, and finally allowed herself to shake. Above her, in the castle, the banquet would be continuing. The nobles would be whispering about the mad servant girl who had assaulted their king. Queen Isolde would be smiling her empty smile, relieved that her murder attempt had failed, but that the only witness was now locked away where no one would believe her. And King Edmund, what was he thinking? Did he feel the burn on his lips where the poison had touched him? Did he wonder why a kitchen maid would risk everything for such a brazen act? Miriam closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. Her grandfather had taught her about poisons, but he had also taught her about patience. "Truth," he used to say, "has a way of surfacing even when buried deep." She clung to those words now, even as doubt crept through her mind like poison through veins. What if the truth never surfaced? What if she died here, in this forgotten cell, and no one ever knew that she had saved a king's life? The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy boots. Purposeful stride. Miriam's pulse quickened. The footsteps stopped outside her cell. A key scraped in the lock. The door swung open and torchlight flooded in, blinding her. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered. When he spoke, Miriam's blood turned to ice. "Tell me." King Edmund's voice was soft, dangerous. "Why I shouldn't have you executed at dawn for what you did tonight." Miriam's throat closed around the words she desperately needed to say. The king stood in the doorway of her cell like an avenging angel, the torchlight behind him turning his figure into something almost inhuman, all sharp edges and shadow. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested on the pommel of his sword. Not quite threatening, but not quite at ease either. This was a man who had been humiliated in front of his entire court, and humiliated men, Miriam knew, were dangerous creatures. "I saved your life, Your Majesty." The words came out stronger than she expected, though her voice trembled at the edges. Her wrists ached where the manacles bit into her skin, and her cheek still throbbed from where the guard had struck her. But she forced herself to meet the king's eyes. Even in the dim light, she could see they were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent and holding secrets of their own. King Edmund stepped into the cell, and the space that had felt small before now felt suffocating. He was a large man, not fat but solid, built like the warrior he had been before the crown settled on his head. Miriam pressed herself harder against the damp stone wall, her heart hammering so loud she was certain he could hear it. "You saved my life," he repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "By forcing yourself upon me like a common tavern wench? By humiliating me in front of every noble house in the kingdom?" "The wine was poisoned." Miriam's words tumbled out in a rush. "I saw it happen. I saw the belladonna go into your goblet. I tasted it on your lips when I kissed you. My grandfather was an apothecary. He taught me to recognize poisons by taste. The belladonna, it has a signature. Sweet at first, then bitter, then metallic. It burns the tongue, makes it go numb. You would have felt it too, if you had swallowed even a mouthful. Within the hour you would have been convulsing. Within 2 hours, your heart would have stopped." The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt? Curiosity? Miriam couldn't tell. He moved closer, crouching down so that his face was level with hers. This close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark beard, the thin scar that ran along his left cheekbone. He couldn't have been more than 35 years old, but he looked older, worn down by the weight of the crown. "If what you say is true," he said quietly, each word measured and deliberate, "then who poisoned my wine?" This was the moment. The moment when Miriam had to decide if she would speak the truth that could get her killed, or stay silent and die anyway for a crime she didn't commit. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Truth is a weapon, girl. Use it carefully." She drew in a shaking breath, tasting the dungeon air, tasting her own fear. "Your wife, Your Majesty, Queen Isolde poisoned your wine." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant sounds of the castle, the guards' footsteps, the crackling torches, the wind, howling through stone corridors, seemed to fade into nothing. King Edmund's face went completely still, a mask of controlled fury that was somehow more terrifying than if he had exploded into rage. His hand tightened on his sword hilt, knuckles going white. "You dare," he whispered, and the softness of his voice made Miriam's blood run cold. "Accuse the queen? You dare speak treason against your sovereign's wife?" "I speak only what I saw." Miriam's voice cracked, but she pushed forward, knowing that hesitation now would be her death. "I was at the servants' station, refilling the bread baskets. I watched her lean forward during the toast. I watched her hand move over your goblet. It was quick, so quick that no one else noticed. But I saw the powder fall from her fingers into the wine. And I saw her face afterward. She was watching you, waiting for you to drink. When I kissed you instead, when the glass fell and shattered, I saw her expression change. She looked." Miriam searched for the right word and found it in the darkness of her cell. Disappointed. King Edmund stood abruptly, turning away from her. His shoulders rose and fell with measured breaths, as if he were physically restraining himself from violence. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow, scraped raw. "You are describing my wife, the woman I have been married to for 7 years, the woman who shares my bed, who sits beside me at council, who will bear my heirs. And you expect me to believe that she would try to murder me based on the word of a kitchen maid I have never seen before tonight?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Miriam knew how insane her accusation sounded. She was nothing. A servant girl with calloused hands and a face that no one remembered. making claims against a queen who wore silk and commanded the respect of nobles. But she had seen what she had seen, and the truth was the only currency she had left. "I expect nothing, Your Majesty," she said, quietly. "But I tasted the belladonna on your lips. That is not something I can unsee or untaste. My grandfather spent his entire life studying poisons. He made me practice until I could identify 37 different toxins by taste alone. I know what I tasted, and I know what I saw." The king turned back to face her, and in the torchlight she could see something new in his expression. Not belief, not yet, but a crack in his certainty. A hairline fracture in the wall of denial. Why would she want me dead? His question was barely audible, as if he were asking himself rather than Miriam. She has everything: power, wealth, status. What could she possibly gain from my death? Miriam hesitated. This was dangerous territory, speaking of things that servants saw but were never supposed to acknowledge. But she had already crossed every line tonight. One more would make no difference. "I have seen the way she looks at Lord Ashford, Your Majesty. I have seen the way he looks at her. During banquets, when you are occupied with other matters, their hands touch beneath the table. They think no one notices, but servants see everything." The king's face drained of color. For a moment, Miriam thought he might strike her, might draw his sword and end this conversation with steel. But instead he did something worse. He laughed. It was a terrible sound, brittle and broken, echoing off the cell walls like the cry of a wounded animal. "Lord Ashford," he repeated, and the name tasted like poison in his mouth. "My most trusted advisor, the man who stood beside me at my coronation, the man who swore a blood oath to protect this kingdom." He pressed his palms against his eyes, shoulders shaking. "God help me." Miriam watched him unravel, this powerful king reduced to a man confronting betrayal from every side. She felt an unexpected surge of sympathy, quickly followed by fear. Sympathy was dangerous. Sympathy made people do foolish things. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "if what I say is true, then I am the only witness to the Queen's crime, and witnesses who threaten queens do not tend to live very long." King Edmund lowered his hands, and when he looked at her, his eyes held a new calculation. He was thinking now, strategizing, seeing the chessboard that had suddenly revealed itself. "You are right," he said slowly. "If you are telling the truth, then you are in grave danger. And if you are lying—" He let the threat hang unfinished. "I am not lying." Miriam met his gaze without flinching, even though every instinct screamed at her to lower her eyes, to show deference, to remember her place. "I have nothing to gain from lying. I am a kitchen maid. I have no family, no connections, no reason to invent such a story. All I have is the truth, and the taste of belladonna still burning on my tongue." The king studied her for a long moment, and Miriam could see him weighing her words, searching her face for signs of deception. Finally he straightened, his hand falling away from his sword. "I need proof," he said. "I cannot move against the queen based solely on your testimony. The nobles would never accept it. But if what you say is true, then she will try again. Poisoners are patient creatures. They wait for the right moment." He moved toward the cell door, then paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "You will remain here, in this cell. As far as anyone knows, you are being held for assaulting the king. No one can know that I believe you. No one can know that I am watching. Do you understand?" Miriam nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The king stepped into the corridor, and the door began to swing closed. But just before it shut, he turned back one final time, his face half in shadow. "If you are lying to me, girl, if this is some elaborate scheme, I will make certain your death is neither quick nor painless." The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place with terrible finality. Miriam sat alone in the darkness, her hands shaking in their iron restraints. She had gambled everything on the truth, and now her life hung in the balance of a king's ability to see betrayal in his own wife's eyes. Outside her cell, footsteps echoed and faded. Above her, in the castle, Queen Isolde was probably smiling her empty smile, believing herself safe, believing the witness to her crime was rotting in the dungeons where she could do no harm. But Miriam knew something the Queen did not know, that kings, once their eyes are open to treachery, see it everywhere, and that made everyone dangerous. The question was, would King Edmund see the truth before the Queen found another way to silence the kitchen maid who knew too much? 3 days passed in the dungeon like 3 lifetimes. Miriam counted the hours by the changing of the guards, by the twice-daily arrival of stale bread and murky water that tasted of rust and despair. Her body ached from sleeping on cold stone, her wrists were raw beneath the manacles, and the bruise on her cheek had deepened to a purple-black that throbbed with each heartbeat. But worse than the physical pain was the uncertainty that gnawed at her mind like rats in the walls. Had the king believed her? Was he investigating? Or had he dismissed her words as the ravings of a desperate servant girl and simply forgotten about her down here in the darkness? On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Miriam woke to the sound of urgent voices echoing through the dungeon. Corridors. Not the usual lazy banter of bored guards, but sharp, clipped exchanges that carried the weight of crisis. She pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest of her stiff muscles, and pressed her ear against the iron door. Footsteps rushed past her cell, multiple sets moving with purpose. Then came a sound that made her blood freeze, the unmistakable ring of swords being drawn from their scabbards. "Lock down every entrance," a voice commanded, one she recognized as belonging to the captain of the guard. No one enters or leaves the dungeon without the king's direct authorization, and someone fetch the royal physician immediately. The royal physician. Miriam's heart began to race. Someone was hurt. Someone important enough to warrant the physician's presence in the dungeons. Her mind immediately went to the worst possibility. Had the Queen tried again? Had she succeeded this time? Was King Edmund lying somewhere above, poisoned beyond help, while Miriam rotted uselessly in her cell? Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The activity in the corridors increased. More guards, more urgent whispers, the sound of something heavy being dragged across stone. Miriam's imagination conjured terrible scenarios, each worse than the last. Finally, as the torchlight began to dim with the coming of evening, her cell door opened. The jailer stood there, his scarred face unreadable, but his eyes held something new, a kind of grudging respect that hadn't been there before. "You're wanted upstairs," he said gruffly, producing a key to unlock her manacles. "The king demands your presence." Miriam's wrists came free, and she had to bite back a gasp as blood rushed back into her hands, bringing with it 1,000 pinprick sensations. She rubbed the raw skin gently, then followed the jailer out into the corridor. What she saw there made her stop dead in her tracks. A body lay on a wooden plank near the dungeon entrance, covered by a heavy cloth. But the cloth wasn't quite large enough, and one pale hand extended from beneath it, fingers curled in a final gesture of agony. A hand that wore 3 rings, 2 gold bands and 1 silver signet. A hand that Miriam had seen many times before, gesturing grandly during banquets, touching the Queen's shoulder with inappropriate familiarity. Lord Ashford's hand. "Keep moving," the jailer ordered, but his voice lacked its usual harshness. He guided her past the body, up the spiral staircase, through corridors that seemed brighter and colder than she remembered. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, their faces pale, their eyes wide with shock and fear. News of Lord Ashford's death had spread through the castle like wildfire, and everyone was looking for someone to blame. They arrived at a small chamber near the king's private quarters, a room Miriam had never entered before, furnished with heavy oak furniture and tapestries depicting hunting scenes. King Edmund stood by the window, his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him so tightly that his knuckles showed white. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "He is dead. Lord Ashford is dead, and the manner of his death leaves no room for doubt about who killed him." The king's shoulders rose and fell with a long, shuddering breath. The royal physician confirmed it an hour ago. Belladonna poisoning. The same poison you claimed was in my wine 4 nights past. Miriam's legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to remain standing. Your Majesty, He was found in his chambers this morning, the king continued as if she hadn't spoken. His servant brought him breakfast at dawn and discovered him cold in his bed. The physician says he likely died sometime in the night. There was a cup of wine on his bedside table, still half full. The physician tested it. Belladonna, enough to kill 3 men. Now the king turned and Miriam saw that his face was haggard, aged 10 years in 4 days. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with shadows so dark they looked like bruises. You were right. God help us all. You were right. The words should have brought Miriam relief, vindication, proof that she wasn't mad or lying. Instead, they filled her with cold dread. Because if Lord Ashford was dead, poisoned by the same toxin that had nearly killed the king, then that meant Queen Isolde was not just willing to murder, she was actively eliminating everyone who stood between her and power. And if the queen was that desperate, that ruthless, then Miriam's life was worth less than dust. The queen, Miriam whispered. Does she know that you suspect her? The queen is currently in her chambers, under guard. The king's voice was hollow, scraped raw by betrayal and grief. I have told her that Lord Ashford's death is being investigated, that the castle is on lockdown until we find the poisoner. She expressed appropriate shock and sorrow. She even wept. His laugh was bitter, broken. She wept for her lover, and I stood there watching her performance, knowing that she put the poison in his wine herself. Miriam's mind raced, trying to understand the queen's logic. But why would she kill him? If they were working together, if he was part of the plot to... Because he became a liability. The king moved away from the window, pacing the small chamber like a caged animal. I have spent the last 4 days doing exactly what I told you I would do. Watching, listening, paying attention to things I was too blind to see before. 2 days ago, I had a private conversation with Lord Ashford. I told him that there had been an incident at the banquet, that I suspected someone had tried to poison me. I watched his face carefully when I said it. He went pale. His hands trembled. He asked too many questions. Who did I suspect? What evidence did I have? Had anyone seen anything unusual? The king stopped pacing, his eyes burning with barely contained rage. He went to her immediately after our conversation. I had him followed. They met in the garden after dark. They argued. The guard who followed him couldn't hear their words, but he described their body language. Tense, aggressive. She grabbed his arm. He pulled away. And then, that same night, he drank poisoned wine. The pieces fell into place in Miriam's mind like tiles in a mosaic, forming a picture more horrifying than she had imagined. She realized he was weak, that he might confess to save himself, so she eliminated him before he could implicate her. Precisely. The king's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She killed the man she claimed to love because he became inconvenient. What does that tell you about her capacity for mercy? It told Miriam everything she needed to know. Queen Isolde was not simply a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage seeking escape. She was a calculating killer who would sacrifice anyone to achieve her goals. And those goals Miriam was beginning to understand went far beyond simply removing an unwanted husband. Your Majesty, Miriam said carefully, if the Queen wanted you dead so she could be with Lord Ashford, then his death changes everything. What does she gain now? A widow's title? The respect of being the former queen? That seems like a poor reward for committing murder. King Edmund met her eyes, and in his gaze Miriam saw a terrible understanding. Unless, he said slowly, her goal was never about love at all. Unless Lord Ashford was simply a tool, a distraction to keep me from seeing the real plot. He moved to a desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a rolled parchment, spreading it flat on the wooden surface. This morning, after Lord Ashford's body was discovered, I had his chambers searched thoroughly. We found this hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Miriam approached the desk, her heart hammering. The parchment was covered in cramped handwriting, columns of numbers and names. At first it looked like nothing more than household accounts, payments for wine, candles, servants' wages. But as her eyes traveled down the page, certain entries stood out. Large sums of money transferred to names she didn't recognize. Dates that corresponded with significant events in the kingdom. The harvest festival, the spring tournament, the winter solstice celebration. "I don't understand," Miriam admitted. "What is this?" "Evidence of embezzlement," the king said flatly. Lord Ashford was stealing from the royal treasury, small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. Over the past 3 years, he has diverted nearly 10,000 gold pieces to private accounts, enough to buy a small army, enough to fund a coup. The room seemed to tilt beneath Miriam's feet. A coup? But the Queen is King Philip's youngest daughter. The king's words came faster now, as if speaking them aloud helped him process the horror of what he was realizing. Philip of Northmarch, our neighboring kingdom. The kingdom we have been in a cold standoff with for the past 5 years over disputed border territories. Our marriage was supposed to unite the kingdoms, to bring peace. But what if that was never her father's intention? What if the marriage was always meant to be a Trojan horse? A way to place his daughter inside our castle, inside our confidence, where she could work to destabilize us from within. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. This was bigger than a simple murder plot. This was treason on a scale that could topple kingdoms. "If you die without an heir," she said slowly, working through the implications, "the nobles would argue over succession. The kingdom would fracture. And in that chaos, King Philip could march his armies across our borders and claim he was simply restoring order. And my dear wife would be there to support him, legitimizing his invasion as a family matter rather than an act of war." The king's fists clenched at his sides. She was never trying to be with Lord Ashford. She was using him to funnel money and resources to her father's cause. And when I started asking questions, when you forced that poisoned wine from my lips and ruined her first attempt on my life, she realized Lord Ashford had become a loose thread, so she cut him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Miriam understood now why the king looked so haunted, so aged. He wasn't just discovering that his wife wanted him dead. He was discovering that his entire marriage had been a lie, that every moment of intimacy, every shared meal, every night spent in the same bed had been part of an elaborate deception orchestrated by an enemy kingdom. "What will you do?" Miriam asked quietly. Before the king could answer, a sharp knock sounded at the door. It opened to reveal the captain of the guard, his face grim. "Your Majesty, you need to come quickly. The Queen is asking to see you. She says she has information about Lord Ashford's death. She says she knows who the poisoner is." King Edmund's eyes met Miriam's, and in that instant they both understood. Queen Isolde was making her next move, and whatever she was planning, it was happening right now. Queen Isolde stood in the center of her private chambers like a statue carved from ivory and gold, her hands folded demurely at her waist, her face a masterpiece of calculated sorrow. She wore a gown of deep blue velvet that brought out the color of her eyes that were red-rimmed and glistening with tears, that looked almost real. Almost. Miriam stood in the shadows near the doorway, positioned there by King Edmund with explicit instructions to watch, to listen, to observe every detail of his wife's performance. Because that's what this was. Miriam understood now. A performance. Every gesture, every trembling breath, every carefully placed tear was part of a script the Queen had been rehearsing her entire life. "My lord husband," Queen Isolde's voice broke perfectly, just enough to convey grief, without losing composure. "I am devastated by Lord Ashford's death. He was a loyal friend to this crown, a trusted advisor, but I must speak to you about something that has been weighing on my conscience." She pressed a delicate hand to her chest, right over her heart. "Something I witnessed that I fear may be connected to his murder." King Edmund stood near the window, his posture rigid, his face an unreadable mask. Miriam could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched so hard. She thought his teeth might crack, but his voice, when he spoke, was perfectly controlled. "Tell me, my dear, what troubles your conscience?" The queen moved closer to him, her silk slippers whispering against the stone floor. "It concerns the servant girl, the one who assaulted you at the banquet 4 nights ago, the one you had imprisoned in the dungeons." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with the embroidered handkerchief. "My lord, I have learned something disturbing about this girl. Something that connects her to Lord Ashford's death in a way that chills my blood." Miriam's heart began to pound. She could see where this was going, could feel the trap closing around her like iron jaws. The queen was about to accuse her of Lord Ashford's murder. It was brilliant, really. Eliminate the witness while simultaneously deflecting suspicion away from herself. Miriam's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. "Go on," the king said, his tone betraying nothing. Queen Isolde turned away from him, moving to a small table where a silver tray held a crystal decanter and matching glasses. "I have been conducting my own investigation into that night's events," she said, pouring wine with steady hands. "I could not understand why a mere kitchen maid would do something so brazen, so insane. So I spoke with other servants, asked questions, searched for answers." She turned back to face the king, offering him a glass of wine. "And I discovered that this girl, this Miriam, is not who she claims to be." The king accepted the glass but did not drink, simply holding it loosely in his hand. "Explain." "Her grandfather was not simply an apothecary, my lord. He was a poisoner." The queen's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "He was executed 15 years ago in the Northern Territories for manufacturing toxins used to assassinate a minor lord. The girl would have been just a child then, but she was there. She watched her grandfather hang, and according to the servants I questioned, she has been obsessed with poisons ever since. She keeps a journal filled with recipes for deadly compounds. She has been seen collecting strange herbs from the forest. Some of the kitchen staff say she practices tasting small amounts of toxic substances to build up immunity." Every word was a mixture of truth and lies, woven together so seamlessly that Miriam could barely tell where one ended and the other began. Yes, her grandfather had been an apothecary. Yes, he had taught her about poisons. Yes, she kept his journal. But he had never been a murderer, never been executed. He had died of fever in his bed, holding her hand, whispering final instructions about how to survive in a world that devoured the weak. The queen had taken fragments of truth and twisted them into something monstrous. "You are suggesting," the king said carefully, "that this servant girl poisoned Lord Ashford?" "I am suggesting more than that, my lord." Queen Isolde set down her own glass and moved closer to her husband, her eyes wide with feigned concern. "I believe she poisoned your wine at the banquet. I believe she deliberately created a scene by kissing you, knowing it would cause chaos and confusion. And in that chaos, while everyone was focused on her shocking behavior, an accomplice placed the poisoned wine on Lord Ashford's table." She reached out to touch the king's arm, her fingers light as bird bones. "Think about it, my love. Lord Ashford was the one who uncovered several financial irregularities in the kingdom's accounts last month. He was close to discovering something, I am certain of it. Someone wanted him silenced. Someone with knowledge of poisons and access to the castle. Someone who could move through the servants' corridors unseen. The logic was flawless. The story was believable. And most damning of all, the queen was using real facts. Lord Ashford's discovery of the embezzlement, Miriam's knowledge of poisons, and reshaping them to serve her narrative. Miriam felt sick. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but King Edmund caught her eye and gave the slightest shake of his head. Not yet. He wanted to hear more. He wanted to let the queen hang herself with her own words. "A compelling theory," the king said, taking a small step back from his wife's touch. "But you have not explained why a kitchen maid would want to kill Lord Ashford. What would be her motive?" Queen Isolde's expression shifted, becoming somber, regretful. "I hesitate to speak of this," as it involves matters of a delicate nature. But you must know the truth, my lord." She lowered her voice to a confidential whisper. "Lord Ashford had certain appetites. Appetites that led him to take liberties with some of the serving girls. I heard whispers of it, but did not want to believe such things about a man of his station. But now I wonder if this girl Miriam was one of his victims. If he forced himself upon her, and she sought revenge through poison. The accusation hung in the air like a noose. It was perfect. It gave Miriam motive, painted her as a victim-turned-killer, and posthumously destroyed Lord Ashford's reputation so thoroughly that no one would question his death too closely. The Queen had just killed him twice, once with poison, once with slander. And she had done it while appearing sympathetic, concerned, even feminist in her defense of a supposedly wronged servant girl. Miriam's vision blurred with rage. She wanted to scream, to launch herself at the Queen and claw that perfect face, to expose every lie spilling from those carefully painted lips. But she remained frozen in the shadows, watching the king's face, waiting for some sign of what he was thinking. King Edmund set down his wineglass on the windowsill with deliberate care. "These are serious accusations, my dear. Accusations that require proof." "I have proof," the Queen said quickly, moving to an ornate chest in the corner of the room. She opened it and pulled out a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and stained. Miriam's breath stopped. That was her grandfather's journal, the one she kept hidden beneath her mattress in the servants' quarters. How had the Queen gotten it? "I had the girl's belongings searched after her arrest. This journal contains detailed recipes for dozens of poisons, including belladonna. The handwriting is crude, barely literate, but the knowledge contained within is deadly. And look here." She flipped to a page marked with a ribbon. "There are notes in the margins, recent notes written in the girl's own hand. Test small amounts daily to build tolerance. Taste must become second nature. Remember grandfather's lessons." Those notes were real. Miriam had written them. But they had been written as a way to survive, to honor her grandfather's memory, to maintain the one skill that set her apart from other servants. They had never been meant as preparation for murder. Yet in the Queen's hands they became evidence of premeditation, of a calculated plan to kill. The king took the journal, examining it closely. Miriam could see his eyes scanning the pages, taking in the meticulous diagrams, the careful notations, the wealth of knowledge contained within. When he looked up, his expression was troubled. "This does appear damning." "There is more, my lord." Queen Isolde returned to the chest and pulled out a small cloth bundle. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing several dried plant specimens and a tiny glass vial containing dark purple berries. Belladonna, found hidden in the girl's quarters, along with other toxic plants. Why would a kitchen maid need such things unless she intended to use them? Miriam's mind raced. She had never kept belladonna in her quarters. She knew better than to possess such obviously dangerous materials. Someone had planted them there. The Queen had planted them there, probably on the same day she had stolen the journal. It was a frame job so thorough, so carefully constructed, that even Miriam herself might have believed it if she didn't know her own innocence. "I want this girl questioned," Queen Isolde said, her voice hardening with righteous anger. "I want her put to torture if necessary. Lord Ashford deserves justice, and this kingdom deserves to know that his killer will pay for her crimes." She turned to look directly at Miriam for the first time, her blue eyes cold as winter ice beneath the eye facade of tears. "She is dangerous, my lord. More dangerous than you realize. She has already demonstrated that she is willing to assault royalty. Who knows what else she might do if given the chance?" The threat was clear. The Queen was not just framing Miriam for murder. She was positioning her as an ongoing danger that needed to be eliminated immediately. And in making that argument, she was also cleverly protecting herself. If Miriam were executed quickly, she could never speak about what she had seen at the banquet. The only witness to the Queen's attempted murder would be silenced forever. King Edmund handed the journal back to his wife, his movements slow and deliberate. "You have given me much to consider, my dear. This evidence is indeed troubling. However, I must follow proper procedure. The girl will be formally questioned. A tribunal will be convened. We will examine all the facts before rendering judgment. A tribunal? Queen Isolde's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing something sharp and desperate beneath. My lord, surely that is unnecessary. The evidence speaks for itself. Why waste time and resources on elaborate proceedings when the guilty party is so obvious? Because I am a king, not a tyrant, Edmund said quietly. And even the lowest servant deserves a fair hearing before facing execution. The queen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had expected him to order Miriam's immediate death, to eliminate the problem swiftly and move on. The fact that he was insisting on procedure meant something was wrong. She studied her husband's face carefully, searching for signs of suspicion, of doubt. Of course, my lord. You are wise and just, as always. I simply wish to see justice served quickly, before this poisoner can strike again. As do I, the king said, his tone final. The tribunal will convene tomorrow at midday. Until then, the prisoner will remain under heavy guard. He turned toward the door, gesturing for Miriam to follow. Come, girl. You have much to answer for. As they left the queen's chambers, Miriam could feel Isolde's eyes boring into her back like daggers. The queen had played her hand beautifully, constructing a trap that seemed inescapable. But she had also revealed something crucial. She was afraid. Afraid enough to act hastily, to frame an innocent servant, to push for immediate execution rather than proper investigation. And fear made people sloppy. Fear made them make mistakes. The question was, would King Edmund see through the lies before the tribunal sentenced Miriam to death? The moment they were safely away from the queen's chambers, King Edmund grabbed Miriam's arm and pulled her into a narrow alcove hidden behind a tapestry depicting St. George slaying the dragon. The space was barely large enough for two people, dark and musty, smelling of old stone and moth-eaten fabric. Miriam's back pressed against the cold wall as the king leaned close, his face inches from hers, his breath hot against her cheek. Listen to me very carefully, he whispered, his voice urgent and raw. My wife just constructed a perfect frame. She has evidence, motive, and opportunity, all pointing directly at you. When that tribunal convenes tomorrow, half the nobles in attendance will be calling for your execution before you even open your mouth to defend yourself. Miriam's throat felt like it was closing. Your Majesty, I did not. I know you did not kill Lord Ashford. The Bavie. King's hand moved from her arm to grip her shoulder, his fingers digging in with desperate intensity. I know because I had guards watching his chambers all night. I know because the wine that killed him was delivered by a hooded servant whom my men could not identify. A servant who moved through the castle with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Someone who knew exactly which corridors to take to avoid the main guard posts. And I know because when we examined Lord Ashford's body more closely, the physician found something the queen does not know we discovered. He released her shoulder and pulled a small object from his pocket, a ring, silver and delicate, with an intricate design of intertwined flowers. This was clutched in Lord Ashford's hand when he died. He must have torn it from his killer's finger in his final moments. Miriam stared at the ring, her heart hammering. Even in the dim light filtering through the tapestry, she could see the craftsmanship was exquisite. The kind of jewelry only nobility could afford. Does it belong to the queen? I do not know yet. My wife possesses dozens of rings, but this design, these flowers are forget-me-nots. They hold symbolic meaning. In the language of flowers, they represent true love and remembrance. The king's voice dripped with bitter irony. Either this is a cruel joke, or it is a message. Either way, it is evidence. Evidence that the queen does not know exists. A small flame of hope kindled in Miriam's chest. Then you can use it at the tribunal. You can prove that I am not the killer. It is not that simple. King Edmund ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him look less like a monarch and more like an exhausted man drowning in impossible choices. If I reveal this ring publicly, the queen will know that I suspect her. She will know that I have been investigating, that I do not believe her narrative. And if she knows that, she will disappear. She will flee to her father's kingdom. and we will lose any chance of uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy. How many others are involved? How deep does this treason run? Are there other nobles in her pocket? Other servants working as her spies? I need answers before I can move against her. Miriam understood the strategic necessity of his words, but understanding did not make her situation any less terrifying. So I am to be the bait. You will let the tribunal proceed. Let the nobles call for my death, all while you search for more evidence? Not just evidence. The king's eyes bored into hers with fierce intensity. I need you to give me information that only you can provide. You have spent 3 months working in this castle as a servant. You see things that nobles miss. You hear conversations that people assume are private because they do not believe servants have ears or brains. You know the rhythms of this place, the secret pathways, the hidden corners. He leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. Think, Miriam. In the months you have worked here, have you noticed anything unusual? Any servants who seemed out of place? Any visitors who came and went at strange hours? Any conversations between the Queen and people other than Lord Ashford? Miriam closed her eyes, forcing her panicked mind to slow down, to sift through months of memories like panning for gold in a muddy stream. Her grandfather had taught her that observation was a skill that required practice, that the human brain noticed far more than it consciously registered. Remember everything, he used to tell her. Your mind is a library, and every moment is a book. You simply need to learn how to find the right shelf. She searched those shelves now, pulling out memories one by one. The Queen's daily routines, the visitors who attended court, the servants who worked in the royal quarters. And then, slowly, fragments began to surface. Small things, seemingly insignificant things. But her grandfather had also taught her that poison worked in small doses, that tiny details could kill just as surely as obvious ones. There is a monk, she said slowly, opening her eyes. Brother Aldrich. He comes to the castle once a month to hear confessions and deliver religious instruction to the household. He always meets privately with the Queen in her prayer room. I thought nothing of it because many noble ladies seek spiritual counsel. But, she paused, the memory sharpening. I served them refreshments once. About 6 weeks ago. I brought wine and bread, knocked on the door, entered when bid. They stopped talking the moment I walked in. The silence was immediate, absolute. And the way they looked at each other before turning to acknowledge me, it was not the look of priest and penitent. It was the look of conspirators interrupted. King Edmund's expression grew sharp, predatory. Brother Aldrich, describe him. Tall, thin, maybe 40 years old. He has a northern accent, though he claims to serve at the southern monastery. His hands, Miriam's eyes widened as the detail clicked into place. His hands are too soft for a monk who supposedly spends his days in labor and prayer. And he wears his robes differently than other brothers I have seen. The fabric is finer. The cross around his neck is silver, not wooden. A spy. The king's voice held grim satisfaction. Probably one of King Philip's agents, posing as a monk to move freely through the kingdom while reporting back to Northmarch. He gripped Miriam's shoulders again, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and desperate hope. This is exactly what I needed. When does this Brother Aldrich come to the castle next? He was here 3 days ago, the day after the banquet. He stayed for several hours, met with the Queen, then departed before sunset. So she has already reported the failed assassination attempt to her father's agent. The king's jaw clenched, which means King Philip knows that his daughter's plot has been compromised. He will be expecting her to either succeed in her next attempt or to extract herself from danger. Time is running out. A horrible thought occurred to Miriam. Your Majesty, if the Queen knows her plot is failing, if she is desperate enough to murder her own lover and frame an innocent servant, what is to stop her from simply poisoning you in your sleep tonight? She has access to your chambers. She shares your bed. You are more vulnerable to her than anyone. The king's expression turned grim. I'm aware of the danger, which is why I have not slept in the royal chambers since the night of the banquet. I have been using the guard captain's quarters. telling everyone I am too disturbed by Lord Ashford's death to share a bed with my grieving wife. It is a thin excuse, but it has kept me alive." He released Miriam and stepped back, his face falling into shadow. "But I cannot avoid her forever, and I cannot move against her until I have irrefutable proof that will convince the noble houses to support me. If I accuse the Queen of treason without overwhelming evidence, it will look like a mad king turning on his innocent wife. King Philip will use that as justification for invasion, claiming he is rescuing his daughter from a tyrant." "So what do we do?" Miriam asked, though she already suspected the answer would break her heart. "We spring the trap," King Edmund said quietly. "Tomorrow at the tribunal you will stand accused of murder. The Queen will present her evidence. The nobles will debate your fate, and I will appear to be uncertain, swayed by my wife's arguments, but troubled by my sense of justice. I will order you held for further investigation rather than immediate execution. This will frustrate the Queen, make her anxious. Anxious people make mistakes." He pulled the forget-me-not ring from his pocket again, turning it over in his fingers. "While you are being held, I will set a trap. I will let it be known through careful whispers that you have offered to reveal the identity of your supposed accomplice in exchange for mercy. I will arrange for you to be moved to a more comfortable cell, one with a window overlooking the courtyard, and I will make sure the Queen learns of this." Miriam felt ice water flood her veins. "You are using me as bait to draw her out. You expect her to try to kill me to prevent me from speaking." "I expect her to send someone to kill you," the king corrected. "She will not risk doing it herself. She will send an assassin, perhaps another poisoned meal, perhaps a pillow over your face in the night, perhaps a blade between the ribs disguised as a suicide. But whoever she sends, my men will be waiting. We will capture the assassin. We will make them confess who sent them. And we will finally have proof that even the most loyal nobles cannot deny." It was a solid plan, a strategic plan, a plan that put all the risk on Miriam's shoulders while keeping the king safe. She should have felt angry, used, manipulated. But instead, she felt a strange sense of clarity. This was her chance to prove her worth, to transform herself from victim to agent of justice. Her grandfather had always told her that knowledge was power, but he had never explained that sometimes power meant being willing to stand in the fire and burn so that others could see the light. "What if your men are not fast enough?" she asked quietly. "What if the assassin succeeds before they can intervene?" King Edmund met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw something that surprised her. Genuine regret. "Then you will die, and I will have your death on my conscience alongside all the others. But at least you will die knowing you saved a kingdom from falling into the hands of traitors." He reached out and touched her cheek with unexpected gentleness, his thumb brushing over the fading bruise the guard had left there days ago. "I am asking you to trust me, Miriam. I am asking you to be brave beyond all reason. And I am promising you that if you survive this, if we expose the Queen's treachery and prevent this war, I will give you anything within my power to grant. Freedom, land, gold, a title, whatever you desire." Miriam thought about her grandfather, dying in his bed with nothing but a journal of poisons to leave behind. She thought about all the years she had spent invisible, scrubbing floors and serving wine to people who never bothered to learn her name. She thought about the taste of belladonna on the king's lips, bitter and deadly and unmistakable. And she thought about the Queen's cold blue eyes, calculating and merciless, belonging to a woman who would murder anyone who stood between her and power. "I do not want gold or titles, Your Majesty," she said softly. "I want the truth to matter. I want justice for Lord Ashford, even though he was a thief and a traitor, because no one deserves to die at the hands of someone they loved. And I want to look the Queen in the face when she finally realizes that a kitchen maid destroyed all her careful plans." A ghost of a smile touched the king's lips. "Then we have an accord." He pulled aside the tapestry, checking to ensure the corridor was empty. "Return to your cell now. The guards will come for you at midday tomorrow. At the tribunal, deny everything. Show fear, show desperation. but do not appear too clever or too composed. The queen must believe you are exactly what she has painted you to be, a simple servant girl in over her head. That should not be difficult, Miriam said with dark humor. I am a simple servant girl in over her head. No, King Edmund said firmly. You are the woman who saved a king's life by stealing poison from his lips. You are the witness who refused to stay silent even when silence would have been safer. You are braver than half the knights in my service. He stepped out into the corridor, his posture straightening, his expression sliding back into the mask of royal authority. Now go, and may God protect you. In the dark hours ahead, because I fear my protection may not be enough. Miriam watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing on stone, and wondered if she would live long enough to see the sunrise after tomorrow's tribunal. Then she turned and made her way back toward the dungeons, walking steadily toward whatever fate awaited her in the shadows. The tribunal convened in the castle's great hall at precisely midday, when the sun stood highest in the sky and cast its merciless light through the tall stained glass windows. Miriam stood in the center of the room, her wrists bound with rope instead of iron, a small mercy that made her bonds look more ceremonial than practical. Around her, arranged in a semicircle like judges of the damned, sat 12 nobles representing the most powerful houses in the kingdom. Their faces were carved from stone and suspicion, their eyes weighing her guilt before a single word had been spoken. King Edmund sat elevated on his throne at the head of the hall, his crown catching the colored light and throwing rainbow shadows across his stern face. To his right, Queen Isolde occupied a smaller throne, dressed in mourning gray that made her look like a beautiful ghost. Her hands were folded in her lap, her expression one of sorrowful dignity, but Miriam could see the predatory gleam in those blue eyes. The queen was watching her the way a cat watches a mouse caught in a corner, with patience and certainty and hunger. Let the proceedings begin, King. Edmund's voice rang out across the hall. Miriam of no house, no family, you stand accused of the murder of Lord Ashford through the use of poison. How do you answer this charge? Miriam's mouth was dry as desert sand. She forced herself to speak clearly, though her voice trembled. I am innocent, Your Majesty. I did not kill Lord Ashford. I have never killed anyone. A murmur rippled through the assembled nobles. Lord Pemberton, a gray-bearded man whose family controlled the eastern trade, Roots leaned forward. The girl claims innocence, yet evidence suggests otherwise. Your Majesty, I move that we hear the Queen's testimony regarding the evidence discovered. The court recognizes Queen Isolde, King Edmund said, his tone formal and distant. The Queen rose gracefully, moving to stand near Miriam but not too close, maintaining the careful distance between royalty and accused criminal. My lords and ladies, she began, her voice soft but clear, it pains me deeply to speak against this poor girl, but truth and justice must prevail over sentiment. She gestured to a table where Miriam's grandfather's journal lay open, along with the cloth bundle containing the belladonna berries. This journal was found hidden in the accused's quarters. Within its pages are detailed recipes for deadly poisons, including the very belladonna that killed Lord Ashford. The girl's own handwriting appears in the margins, noting practices to build tolerance to toxins. Lady Catherine of Blackmore, a woman known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue, spoke up. Knowledge of poisons is not itself proof of murder. Many apothecaries and healers possess such knowledge for legitimate purposes. Indeed, Queen Isolde agreed smoothly. Which is why I present additional evidence. The accused was seen by multiple servants behaving strangely in the days before Lord Ashford's death. She was observed collecting plants from the forest. She asked unusual questions about Lord Ashford's routines, when he took his meals, who served him, whether he drank wine before sleeping. And, most damning of all, the Queen's voice dropped to a confidential tone that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. She had motive. The assembled nobles leaned forward collectively, hungry for scandal. Queen Isolde let the moment stretch, building tension like a master storyteller. Lord Ashford, may God rest his troubled soul, had certain appetites that led him to take liberties with serving girls. I have learned through investigation that the accused was one of his victims. He forced himself upon her 2 months past, in the wine cellar, when she was sent to retrieve bottles for a banquet. She reported the assault to no one, perhaps from shame, perhaps from fear. But that violation festered in her mind, growing into hatred and thoughts of revenge. Miriam's knees nearly buckled. The lie was so perfectly constructed, so impossible to disprove. How could she prove something hadn't happened? Lord Ashford was dead and could not deny it. The Queen could easily produce servants who would swear they had seen Miriam emerge from the wine cellar looking disheveled, who would testify they had noticed her avoiding Lord Ashford afterward. False witnesses were cheap, especially when backed by royal authority. That is not true, Miriam said, but her voice came out weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. Lord Ashford never, I never. Of course you would deny it, interrupted Lord Pemberton. What woman wishes to speak publicly of such shame? But denial does not erase facts. You possess the knowledge to create poison. You had access to the materials. You had motive born of violation and rage, and you have already demonstrated disturbed behavior by assaulting the king himself at the banquet. I did not assault the king. Miriam's voice rose, desperation leaking through her carefully maintained composure. I saved his life. The wine he was about to drink was poisoned, with the same belladonna that killed Lord Ashford. I tasted it when I kissed him. I stopped him from drinking death. The nobles erupted into conversation, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of skepticism and intrigue. King Edmund raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of carefully calculated doubt. The accused claimed she saved my life through her kiss. Yet I tasted nothing unusual in the wine that splashed my lips. I felt no burning, no numbness, none of the symptoms she describes. Because I took the poison into my own mouth before it could reach your tongue, Your Majesty, Miriam said urgently. She could feel the moment slipping away, could feel the noose tightening around her neck with every passing second. My grandfather taught me to recognize poisons by taste. I have trained my tongue since childhood. The belladonna, it burns at first, then turns the mouth numb, then leaves a metallic aftertaste like copper. I tasted all of that when our lips met. I saved you. Queen Isolde laughed, a delicate tinkling sound that somehow conveyed both pity and contempt. My lords, surely we do not believe this fantasy. The girl expects us to accept that she, a common kitchen maid, possesses abilities beyond those of trained physicians, that she could identify poison through a kiss, that she heroically sacrificed herself to save the king. The Queen turned to face Miriam directly, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of gentle condescension. Poor child. You have confused your own disturbed imagination with reality. Perhaps Lord Ashford's assault damaged your mind more deeply than your body. Perhaps you created this elaborate tale to justify your murderous actions, to paint yourself as a heroine rather than the vengeful killer you truly are. The nobles were nodding now, their initial uncertainty hardening into conviction. Miriam could see it happening in real time, the Queen's narrative settling over the room like a blanket, smothering truth beneath layers of plausible lies. She looked desperately at King Edmund, searching his face for some sign of support, some indication that he would intervene, but the king's expression remained neutral, troubled, as if he himself were unsure what to believe. Your Majesty, Lord Pemberton addressed the king, the evidence is overwhelming. The girl possessed poison. She had knowledge and motive. She has already demonstrated violent, irrational behavior. I move that she be sentenced to death by hanging at dawn tomorrow. Seconded, called out another noble, and then another, until half the assembled lords and ladies were calling for her execution. Miriam felt the ground tilting beneath her feet. This was happening too fast. The king was supposed to delay, to order more investigation, to give himself time to set the trap. But the noble's bloodlust was rising like floodwater, and even a king could not easily swim against such a current. Wait. The voice came from the back of the hall, sharp and commanding. The crowd parted to reveal a figure stepping forward, a tall, thin man in monk's robes, his face shadowed by a deep hood. "Brother Aldrich." Miriam's heart stopped. What was the Queen's spy doing here, inserting himself into the proceedings? The monk approached the king's throne and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, forgive my interruption, but I have information crucial to this tribunal, information regarding the accused's character and history." King Edmund's eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign of his surprise. "Speak, brother. The court will hear your testimony." Brother Aldrich turned to face the assembled nobles, pushing back his hood to reveal a face of severe angles and cold eyes. "I serve at the Southern Monastery, where I keep records of all births, deaths, and significant events in the region. 6 months ago, a merchant passing through our monastery told a disturbing tale. He spoke of a young woman matching this girl's description who was caught attempting to steal valuable medicinal herbs from his caravan. When confronted, she claimed she needed them for healing purposes. But the herbs she took, nightshade, hemlock, wolfsbane, these are not healing herbs. These are killing herbs." Miriam's vision swam. Another lie, another fabrication. But this one was even more dangerous because it came from a supposedly impartial religious authority. "That is not true," she said, but her voice sounded hollow, defeated. "I have never stolen anything. I have never even traveled beyond this kingdom. Desperation makes liars of us all," Brother Aldrich said gently, his voice dripping false compassion. "I do not judge you, child. I merely report what was told to me and what the merchant's description suggests. A young woman, approximately 20 years of age, with dark hair and unusual green eyes." He gestured toward Miriam. "Eyes the color of spring leaves," he said. "Eyes one does not easily forget." It was too specific to be coincidence. The Queen had coached him perfectly, had given him details about Miriam's appearance to make his testimony seem authentic. And now Miriam stood accused not just by physical evidence and supposed motive, but by the word of a holy man whose testimony carried the weight of divine authority. Lady Catherine stood, her face troubled. "Your Majesty, I am troubled by the mounting evidence. Yet I am also troubled by the speed with which we rush toward judgment. The girl deserves the opportunity to present a defense, to call witnesses on her behalf." What witnesses could she possibly call? Queen Isolda's voice was sharp now, impatient. "She is a servant with no family, no connections, no one to speak for her character except other servants who know nothing of her secret life. My lord husband, I beg you, do not let sentiment cloud justice. Lord Ashford's murderer stands before us. The evidence is clear. The testimony is damning. We have a duty to the kingdom to punish those who kill nobles in their beds." King Edmund sat motionless on his throne, his face a mask of internal conflict. Miriam realized with sudden, terrible clarity that he was caught between impossible choices. If he defended her too strongly, he would expose his suspicions about the Queen. If he condemned her too quickly, he would lose the chance to use her as bait. He needed to find a middle path, but that path was narrowing with every passing moment. "I am troubled," the king said finally, his voice heavy with false uncertainty. "The evidence is indeed damning, yet I find myself reluctant to order a woman's death based solely on circumstantial connections. Brother Aldrich's testimony of a similar woman stealing poison herbs. This is hearsay, not proof. The journal and materials found in her quarters could have been planted." "Planted?" Queen Isolda's voice rose with indignation. "My lord, you suggest that someone deliberately framed this girl? Who would do such a thing, and why?" The king did not answer directly. Instead, he turned his gaze to Miriam, and in his eyes she saw an apology. "I am ordering the accused held for further investigation. She will be moved to the North Tower cell, one with better conditions, where she may contemplate the gravity of her situation. In 3 days' time, we will reconvene this tribunal. If by then she has information to share about accomplices or other parties involved in Lord Ashford's death, I will consider mercy. If not..." He let the threat hang unfinished. The nobles erupted in protest. They wanted blood now, wanted the satisfaction of swift justice. But the king's word was final, and slowly, Reluctantly, they subsided into grumbling acceptance. Queen Isolde's face remained carefully neutral, but Miriam saw the calculation in her eyes. The queen understood immediately what the king was doing, offering Miriam a chance to betray non-existent accomplices, creating the illusion that there might be others involved. And that meant Miriam had just been painted as an even greater threat, someone who possessed dangerous knowledge that needed to be silenced before she could speak. As guards came to take her away, Miriam locked eyes with the queen across the great hall. For just a moment, their gazes held, and in that moment, Miriam saw the truth naked and undisguised. The queen knew that Miriam knew, and the queen would do whatever necessary to ensure that knowledge died with her, preferably before those 3 days expired. The trap had been set. Now Miriam simply had to survive long enough to spring it. The North Tower cell was a palace compared to the dungeon. A narrow bed with clean straw, a small window that let in actual sunlight, a wooden bucket that did not reek of decades of human waste. But Miriam took no comfort in these improvements, because she understood exactly what they meant. The king had made her comfortable so that she would be easier to kill. A prisoner who slept soundly was a prisoner who would not hear an assassin's approach. She did not sleep that first night. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, watching the door, listening to every sound in the tower. The wind howling through stone corridors, the occasional footsteps of guards changing shifts, the distant cry of an owl hunting in the darkness. Her body ached for rest, but her mind refused to surrender consciousness. If death was coming for her, she would meet it with open eyes. The assassin came on the second night. Miriam had finally allowed herself to doze, exhaustion overcoming vigilance, when a sound jerked her back to wakefulness, the soft scrape of metal against metal. Someone was picking the lock on her cell door. Her heart exploded into frantic rhythm, but she forced herself to remain still, to keep her breathing steady and deep, to appear asleep. The king had promised his men would be watching. She had to trust that promise, had to believe that guards were hidden nearby, ready to intervene. The lock clicked. Open with a sound like breaking bones, the door eased inward, hinges creaking despite someone's obvious attempt at stealth. Moonlight from the window caught the edge of a blade, not a sword but something smaller, more intimate, a dagger meant for close work, for sliding between ribs or across throats. Miriam's every muscle tensed, preparing to roll off the bed, to scream, to fight with her bare hands if necessary. The figure moved closer, and in the pale light, Miriam could make out details. Not a man but a woman, dressed in servant's clothing, her face obscured by a dark scarf wrapped around her nose and mouth. She approached the bed with careful steps, the dagger held professionally in a forward grip. This was not some desperate criminal or mad zealot. This was someone trained in the art of killing, someone who knew exactly where to strike to ensure silence and swift death. The assassin reached the bedside and raised the blade. Miriam's muscles coiled, ready to throw herself sideways, when suddenly the cell exploded with movement. Guards burst through the door, torches flaring to life, voices shouting commands. The assassin spun with inhuman speed, her blade flashing out in an arc that caught one guard across the forearm, opening a red line through leather and flesh. He cried out and stumbled back, but 2 more guards rushed forward, one wielding a wooden staff that cracked across the woman's wrist with brutal efficiency. The dagger clattered to the floor. The assassin did not surrender quietly. She fought like a cornered animal, all teeth and fury, until 3 guards managed to pin her against the wall and tear away the scarf covering her face. Miriam's breath stopped. She recognized the woman, Margaret, one of the Queen's personal maids, a quiet girl who always kept her eyes downcast and spoke only when spoken to. Miriam had served alongside her at banquets, had passed her in corridors dozens of times, had never suspected she was anything other than what she appeared to be. "No," Margaret gasped, struggling against the guard's grip. "No, please, I have children. I have 2 small children. She said she would kill them if I did not do this. Please, you must understand." "Who?" King Edmund's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. He stood in the doorway of the cell, still in his nightclothes but wearing his crown, as if he had thrown it on in haste to remind everyone who held authority here. "Who threatened your children?" Margaret's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I cannot say. If I speak, my children will die. She has people watching them. She said if I failed, if I was caught, I must stay silent or she would—" Her voice broke into sobs. The king moved closer, his expression hard but not without compassion. "Your children are already safe. I had them removed from their home 3 hours ago and placed under guard in the eastern barracks. They are being cared for by the captain's wife, who is feeding them warm milk and telling them stories. They believe their mother is working late in the castle. They are not afraid. They are not in danger. But they will only remain safe if you tell me the truth. Who ordered you to kill this prisoner?" Margaret's resistance shattered like glass thrown against stone. She sagged in the guard's grip, her body racked with shaking sobs. "The Queen," she whispered. "Queen Isolde. She came to me yesterday after the tribunal. She said the prisoner was dangerous. That she was part of a plot to overthrow the kingdom, that she had to die before she could reveal secrets that would destroy us all. The Queen said she could not move through official channels because there were traitors in the court who would warn the prisoner. She said I was the only one she could trust." Margaret looked up at the king, her face a mask of desperation and shame. "I did not want to do it, Your Majesty. I swear on my children's lives, I did not want to become a murderer. But she has my babies. She knows where they sleep. She said she would make it look like an accident, a fire, a fall downstairs. I had no choice." Miriam felt something cold and sharp pierce her chest. The Queen had weaponized a mother's love, had turned it into a tool for murder. There was a kind of genius in that cruelty, a calculated understanding of human weakness that was almost admirable in its evil. King Edmund's face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight Miriam could see the muscles jumping. Beneath his beard, "Guards, take this woman to a secure location. Not the dungeons, somewhere comfortable. Post men outside her door and allow no one to enter except myself and the captain. She is to be treated as a witness under protection, not a criminal. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The captain of the guard responded, gesturing for his men to escort Margaret out. As they led her away, she turned back to look at Miriam, her eyes red and swollen. "I am sorry," she choked out. "Forgive me. I am so sorry." Miriam did not know what to say. She could not forgive attempted murder, but neither could she condemn a mother's desperate choice. So she said nothing, simply watched as the woman who had tried to kill her was led away into the darkness. When the cell was empty except for herself and the king, Miriam finally found her voice. "You have your proof now. Margaret will testify that the Queen ordered my death. You can move against her. It is not enough." King Edmund's voice was hollow, defeated. "Margaret is a servant. The Queen will claim the woman is lying, that she invented the story to save herself from execution. Without corroboration, without additional evidence, the nobles will not support a treason charge against their queen. They will say I am a mad king inventing conspiracies to justify murdering my own wife." He turned to face Miriam, and in his eyes she saw exhaustion deeper than any physical tiredness. "I need more. I need the connection to King Philip. I need proof that this was not just a jealous wife trying to murder her husband, but an act of war orchestrated by a foreign power." "Then let me help you find it," Miriam said urgently. "I told you about Brother Aldrich. He is the connection you need. He testified at the tribunal. He inserted himself into the proceedings. Why would a monk involve himself unless he was protecting the Queen's interests? Use me again. Spread word that I am willing to confess everything in exchange for my life. Say that I have written out a full statement implicating my accomplices. Make the Queen believe I am about to name Brother Aldrich. If he is truly her father's agent, he will have to act. He will have to either flee the kingdom or silence me permanently. Either action will prove the connection you need." The king studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You are asking me to use you as bait a second time. You nearly died tonight." The guards were positioned in the corridor. "But if that assassin had moved faster, If she had been more skilled, you would be dead before they could intervene. Are you truly willing to risk your life again? Miriam thought about her grandfather, about his final words. Use your knowledge wisely, he had told her. But he had also taught her something else, something he had never spoken aloud but had demonstrated through every action of his life, that some truths were worth dying for, that standing against evil, even when you were powerless and afraid, was the only way to give your life meaning. I'm already dead if we do nothing, she said quietly. The Queen will find another way. Another assassin, another poison, another convenient accident. The only path forward is through the fire, not around it. So yes, Your Majesty, use me. Set your trap. And this time, let us catch not just the blade, but the hand that wields it. King Edmund nodded slowly, respect and sorrow mingling in his expression. Then we proceed to the final gambit. Tomorrow morning I will announce that you have provided a written confession naming your accomplices. I will say that one of them is a man of the church, a false monk who has been passing secrets to enemy kingdoms. I will not name Brother Aldrich directly, but the description will be clear enough. And I will announce that you are to be transferred to the royal chapel at sunset, where you will make a full public confession before God and witnesses. The chapel, Miriam repeated, understanding. Immediately. A sacred space where violence would be unthinkable, where guards would be less numerous, because who would dare spill blood on holy ground? Exactly. It is the perfect place for an assassination disguised as divine judgment. If Brother Aldrich is truly working for King Philip, he cannot allow you to speak publicly. The Queen cannot allow it. One of them, or both, will make a move. And when they do, the King's hand moved to the sword at his belt. We will be ready. Miriam felt a strange calm settle over her. The peace that comes when all choices have been made and there is nothing left but to walk forward into whatever end awaits. How many people will you tell about this plan? Only the captain of the guard and 4 men whose loyalty I would stake my life on. Everyone else, the nobles, the servants, even most of the guards, will believe the announcement is genuine. The fewer people who know the truth, the less chance the Queen will suspect a trap. She is clever, Miriam warned. She will be suspicious of anything that seems too convenient, which is why we will make it look inconvenient. I will appear reluctant to move you, concerned about security, only agreeing after pressure from Brother Aldrich himself, who will surely insist that a confession in God's house carries more weight than words spoken in a dungeon cell. The King moved toward the door, then paused. Try to sleep if you can. Tomorrow will be a long day, and the night that follows will be longer still. You will need your strength. After he left, Miriam lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible, but somehow, as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the window, exhaustion finally claimed her. She dreamed of her grandfather, of his weathered hands teaching her to identify poisons by taste, and of his voice telling her one final time, "Truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried deep." When she woke, the sun was high and the trap was set. All that remained was to see who would walk into it, and whether she would survive long enough to watch them fall. The royal chapel smelled of incense and old stone, and secrets whispered to God. Miriam knelt at the altar as the sun bled red through stained glass windows, painting her face in crimson and gold. Behind her, the chapel was nearly empty, just 4 guards positioned at the corners, Brother Aldrich standing near the confessional booth, and King Edmund seated in the first pew, his crown catching the dying light. The Queen had not come. That absence screamed louder than any accusation. "Are you prepared to make your confession, child?" Brother Aldrich's voice echoed off vaulted ceilings, gentle and paternal. But Miriam could hear the tension beneath his carefully measured words, could see the way his fingers kept moving to the cross around his neck, a nervous gesture that betrayed his calm exterior. "I am, brother," Miriam said softly. She had rehearsed this moment with the king, had practiced the words until they felt almost true. "I wish to confess my sins before God and King, and to name those who led me astray." Brother Aldrich moved closer, his robes whispering against stone. "Then speak, and may God have mercy on your soul." Miriam drew a breath that tasted of smoke and fear. "I confess that I—" The chapel door burst open with a crack like thunder. Queen Isolde stood silhouetted in the doorway, no longer the grieving wife in mourning gray, but something wild and desperate. She held a crossbow, small, easily concealed, but deadly at this range. Her hair had come loose from its elaborate braiding, falling around her shoulders like a dark waterfall. Her eyes were fever bright, the eyes of someone who had been backed into a corner with no escape. "No more lies," the Queen's voice rang out sharp and raw. "No more games, Edmund. I know what this is. I know what you are trying to do." The crossbow swung toward Miriam, the bolt's iron tip gleaming like a promise of death. "She has poisoned your mind against me. This servant girl, this nobody, has convinced you to betray your own wife." King Edmund rose slowly from the pew, his hand moving carefully toward his sword. "Put down the weapon, Isolde. This madness serves no purpose." "Madness?" The Queen's laugh was brittle, breaking at the edges. "You speak to me of madness when you stage elaborate traps like a hunter pursuing game? When you use innocent women as bait to catch your own wife?" She took a step into the chapel, and Miriam could see tears streaming down her perfect face. "I loved you once, Edmund, when we first married, when I was just 16 years old and you were the handsome warrior king who had won me in a treaty. I tried so hard to love you, but you never saw me. You never asked what I wanted, what I dreamed of. I was just a political prize, a womb to carry your heirs, a decoration for your throne. That does not justify murder." The king's voice was steady, but Miriam could hear the pain beneath it. "That does not justify poisoning me, killing Lord Ashford, conspiring with your father to overthrow this kingdom." "My father?" Queen Isolde's expression twisted with something that looked almost like genuine confusion. "What does my father have to do with this? You think—" Understanding dawned across her face, followed by a bark of laughter that held no humor. "Oh, Edmund, you still do not see it, do you? You still do not understand what this is really about." Brother Aldrich had been slowly moving along the wall, positioning himself behind a stone pillar. Now he stepped forward, his gentle priestly demeanor sliding away like a discarded mask. "Your Majesty," he addressed the Queen, his voice cold and commanding, "you are making a grave mistake. Lower the weapon. We can still salvage this situation." "Salvage?" Queen Isolde whirled on him, the crossbow now pointing at the false monk. "You mean silence everyone who knows the truth and continue with the original plan? The plan I never agreed to? The plan my father forced upon me through you?" Miriam's mind raced, pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. The Queen had not been the mastermind. She had been another pawn, manipulated by her father's spy, forced into a role she had not chosen. But that did not make her innocent. She had still tried to commit murder, had still sent Margaret to kill Miriam. Victim and villain could exist in the same person, and Queen Isolde was proof of that terrible duality. "My father sent Brother Aldrich to me 6 months after my marriage," the Queen continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "He told me that Edmund would never love me, that I was wasting my life in a loveless political arrangement. He said my father had a plan to free me, to give me the power to rule in my own right. All I had to do was help remove certain obstacles." She turned back to the king, her face a mask of anguish. "I did not want to kill you, Edmund. I swear on everything holy, I did not want to become a murderer. But Lord Ashford, he was bleeding the treasury dry, preparing to buy mercenaries for my father's invasion. When you started asking questions, when that girl—" She gestured with the crossbow toward Miriam. "Interfered at the banquet, I knew Lord Ashford would confess to save himself. So I did what I had to do. I protected myself the only way I knew how, by becoming the very monster your father wanted you to be." King Edmund said quietly, "I had no choice." The Queen's scream echoed off stone walls. "You do not know what it is like to be a woman in this world, Edmund, to be traded like livestock, to have your body and future decided by men who see you as nothing more than a womb and an alliance. My father wanted me to be his weapon. You wanted me to be your ornament. Neither of you ever asked what I wanted to be." Miriam felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the woman who had tried to have her killed. Because beneath the evil acts, beneath the murder and conspiracy, was a truth that resonated in her very bones. The truth of powerlessness, of being invisible, of having your life controlled by forces beyond your reach. She and the Queen were not so different. They had both been trapped by circumstance, both forced to fight for survival in a world that saw them as disposable. The only difference was that Miriam had chosen truth as her weapon, while the Queen had chosen poison. "What you wanted does not justify what you have done," the king said, but his voice had lost its hard edge. "Isolde, please, put down the crossbow. Let us end this without more bloodshed. I will show you mercy. I will allow you to return to your father's kingdom rather than face execution. But you must stop this now." "Mercy?" Queen Isolde's face crumpled. "You would send me back to my father in disgrace, to be punished for failing his mission. You would condemn me to a life of imprisonment in the northern castle where he keeps his disappointing daughters?" She shook her head, her whole body trembling. "No. There is no mercy in this world for women who fail their fathers and husbands. There is only death, quick if you are lucky, slow if you are not." Brother Aldrich moved with sudden, shocking speed. He pulled a dagger from beneath his robes and lunged toward Miriam, clearly intending to eliminate the witness before she could testify to what she had just heard. But the king's hidden guards had been waiting for exactly such a move. They emerged from behind pillars and from the shadows near the altar, converging on the false monk in a coordinated attack that spoke of careful planning and military precision. Brother Aldrich was fast, but he was outnumbered. His blade caught one guard across the cheek, opening a shallow cut, before a wooden staff cracked across his wrist and sent the dagger spinning across stone floor. Two more guards tackled him, driving him to the ground with brutal efficiency. Within seconds, he was subdued, his arms wrenched behind his back and bound with rope. "You cannot prove anything," Brother Aldrich snarled, blood trickling from his split lip where his face had connected with stone. "I am a man of God. My word carries more weight than that of traders and servant girls. Your word means nothing when we found this in your chambers." King Edmund pulled a rolled parchment from his tunic, the same ledger Lord Ashford had kept hidden beneath his floorboards. "Your correspondence with King Philip. Orders for troop movements, plans for invasion, all written in your own hand, sealed with your personal signet. We have been watching you, brother, just as we have been watching the Queen. And now we have everything we need to prove that Northmarch has committed acts of war against this kingdom." The false monk's face went pale. He had been caught completely, his carefully constructed cover blown apart by evidence he had not known existed. "The Queen," he said desperately. "She can confirm that I acted alone, that King Philip had no knowledge of—" "Do not dare speak my father's name." Queen Isolde's voice cut through his pleading like a blade. The crossbow was still in her hands, still loaded, still dangerous. But now it was pointed not at Miriam or the king, but at Brother Aldrich himself. "You destroyed my life. You came to me with your whispers and your promises. You told me I could be free. But all you did was turn me into a killer, into a traitor, into everything I never wanted to become." "Isolde, no!" King Edmund started forward, but he was too far away. The crossbow bolt flew true, striking Brother Aldrich in the shoulder with a meaty thunk. He screamed, a sound of pure animal pain, as the guards holding him jumped back in shock. The wound was not fatal. The angle was wrong, the bolt missing any vital organs. But it was a message, a statement written in blood and violence. The Queen was done being anyone's pawn. "Now you carry my mark," Queen Isolde said, lowering the crossbow with shaking hands. "Now everyone will know that you bled by my choice, not my father's orders." She turned to face her husband, tears streaming down her face. "I am guilty, Edmund. I confess to everything. I tried to poison you. I murdered Lord Ashford. I sent an assassin to kill that girl. I am everything you believe me to be and worse." She sank to her knees on the cold chapel floor, the crossbow clattering from her grip. "But I am also a victim of my father's ambition and your indifference, and I am tired of being both. I am so very tired." King Edmund moved to stand before his wife, looking down at the broken woman who had tried to murder him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he removed his crown and set it aside, kneeling down so that they were at the same level. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I am sorry that I did not see your pain. I am sorry that I treated our marriage as a political arrangement rather than a partnership between two people. I cannot undo the past, Isolde, but I can promise you this. You will not be returned to your father. You will face justice here, in this kingdom, but that justice will be tempered with mercy. You will live. You will have time to find peace, if such a thing is possible after all you have done." Queen Isolde closed her eyes, more tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "That is more than I deserve." Guards came forward to take both prisoners away, Brother Aldrich still cursing and bleeding, Queen Isolde silent and resigned to her fate. As they were led from the chapel, Miriam finally allowed herself to breathe, to feel the weight of survival settle into her bones. She had done it. She had stood against power and conspiracy and emerged alive. Her grandfather would have been proud. King Edmund approached her slowly, offering his hand to help her rise from where she still knelt at the altar. "You saved my life twice, Miriam of No House, once with a kiss that tasted of poison, and once with courage that exposed treason. I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with gold or titles." Miriam took his hand and stood, her legs unsteady but her voice firm. "I do not want gold or titles, Your Majesty. I want only one thing. Name it, and if it is within my power, it is yours. I want my grandfather's journal returned to me, and I want permission to open an apothecary shop in the city where I can teach others what he taught me, not how to kill, but how to heal, how to identify poisons so they can be avoided, how to use knowledge as protection rather than a weapon." She met the king's eyes without flinching. "I want to turn the tools of death into tools of life. That is the only memorial my grandfather deserves." King Edmund smiled, a real smile, tired but genuine. "You shall have your journal, your shop, and a royal charter granting you protection as the kingdom's official master apothecary. You will want for nothing, Miriam. This I swear." As they walked out of the chapel together into the cool evening air, Miriam looked up at the darkening sky and felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the quiet hope of new beginnings. She had entered the king's service as a nameless kitchen maid. She left it as a woman who had changed the course of kingdoms, and in doing so, she had honored her grandfather's final lesson. That truth, no matter how bitter, was worth tasting. Miriam entered the castle as nobody, a kitchen maid with calloused hands and a forgotten face, carrying only the weight of her grandfather's dying wisdom. She left as the woman who exposed treason, who stood before power without flinching, who chose truth even when lies would have been safer. But her greatest victory wasn't saving a king's life or unmasking a conspiracy. It was proving that courage has nothing to do with crowns or titles, and everything to do with the choice we make when faced with impossible odds. She could have stayed silent. She could have let the poison do its work and disappeared into the shadows where servants belong. Instead, she kissed death itself and dared to speak truth to power. The question is, would you have done the same? How many of us witness injustice and say nothing because speaking up feels too dangerous, too costly, too futile? How many times do we convince ourselves that we're too small, too powerless, too insignificant to change anything? Miriam teaches us that the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that our voice doesn't matter, that our truth is too small to shake kingdoms. She was nobody until the moment she decided to be somebody. And in that decision, she changed everything. Queen Isolde had power, wealth, and royal blood, yet she became a prisoner of her own choices. Miriam had nothing but knowledge and courage, yet she became free. Power, this story whispers, isn't about what you're born with. It's about what you're willing to stand for when everything is on the line. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the moments in your own life when you chose courage over comfort, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like if you believe that truth matters, even when it's dangerous. And subscribe to this channel, because we're here to tell stories that don't just entertain. They remind us what it means to be human, to struggle, to survive, and sometimes, against all odds, to triumph. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are never too small to make a difference. You just have to be brave enough to try.